Hello, I'm continuing my reviews on the Friday the 13th series. I'm once again joined by my friend Chris Espianl.
How's everybody doing?
And the movie we're reviewing is Freddy vs. Jason. Now, Freddy vs. Jason came out in 2003, and this is the 11th film in the Friday the 13th franchise, and is the 8th film in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, officially setting the two franchises in the same universe, which was certainly hinted at the end of Jason Goes to Hell. Now, continuity-wise, this film is supposed to be set between the events of Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X, and it's set a few years after the events of Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. Now, I just recently reviewed the first 10 Friday the 13th movies, which you can see on the playlist for Horror Month Season 13, and last year I reviewed all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, with the exception of this one, which you can see on the playlist for Horror Month Season 12, and I actually did review this movie all the way back in 2011. That review is still up, however it's no longer public. It's now marked as unlisted, but you can still see it with a link, which I'll leave in the description below. Now, the film was directed by Ronnie Yu, who is actually a Hong Kong filmmaker. I haven't seen any of his Hong Kong or Chinese movies. I know he's really well known for a movie he did called The Bride with White Hair, and I know he did a lot of movies for Jet Li, but right before this he directed, and this is an American movie, right before this he directed Bride of Chucky. Now, before Ronnie Yu, New Line actually approached people like Rob Zombie, Guillermo del Toro, and even Wes Craven, who of course directed the original Nightmare on Elm Street, about potentially directing this one. Obviously, all of them turned it down, but dear God, it would have been interesting to see what Del Toro would have done with Freddy vs. Jason, but we'll never know, I guess. The film is written by Mark Swift and Damian Shannon. Now, they're the credited screenwriters, but actually, this movie went through several different scripts, and I think the final script did take elements from several of the other scripts. Like, I know at one point David S. Goyer submitted a script, I think David Scow submitted a script, and according to an interview I saw with Robert Englund, even Mike Judge, who created Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill, did his own script for Freddy vs. Jason.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and there were a lot of crazy ideas for a Freddy vs. Jason movie, which I'll touch on in a little bit, but this movie was in development hell for years. Like, they were trying to do a Freddy vs. Jason movie since the 80s. Now, it should be noted, since this came out in 2003, this movie's 20 years old now. And I remember when this came out. I was 11 when this movie came out. Yeah. And, honestly, for our generation, this movie was kind of a big deal when it came out.
Yeah, it was. You know, I heard a lot of talks and a lot of people like, oh, Freddy's better, Jason's better. Like, there was so many debates.
Yeah, I remember in school, like, you know, kids that I know probably have not seen the other Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Yeah. We're talking about this movie. Yeah, and it's 20 fucking years old now.
It just shows our age right now, huh?
Yeah. Wow. Where'd 2 decades go? So what do you think of Freddy vs. Jason?
It was a joyride. I like it. I the only way I can describe it's like a roller coaster. You know what I mean? I didn't really took it. Well, when I was younger, I did took it a bit serious. You know, I was Team Jason, but you know, it was cool. It was cool. I like the special effects they had on. I like the whole premise of trying to make forget Freddy, in order, you know, for them to, like, get rid of him once and for all.
Yeah, that was a cool idea. This idea that Freddy is almost like a virus, and, like, they had to, like, almost quarantine the kids who had contact with him. That was a cool concept, admittedly. Now, this is a movie that I always used to say I kind of hated and liked at the same time, because I have a lot of problems with this movie. But you know what? I've kind of taken the stick out of my ass about this movie. This movie is just so fucking entertaining that I forget about all the plot problems that this movie has. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, this is a dumb movie. This is a really, really dumb movie. It's certainly not a well-written movie by any means, but you know what? The film is just pure, unadulterated entertainment. And if you don't have a stick up your ass, then I would recommend it.
Yeah, that's why I call it a roller coaster. You just sit back and you just let things happen.
Yeah.
And you kind of get lost in all of the craziness and all the wild things going on in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You just there is a lot of things that did not make sense, but it's kind of like when everything hits the fan and all the action and all of the violence and all of that just splurge out, you just kind of just don't give a shit anymore.
So the plot of Freddy vs. Jason is sometime after the events of Freddy's Dead, new families move to the town of Springwood, thereby repopulating the town with children and teenagers for Freddy to prey on. Now, because of Krueger's past actions, the adults in Springwood know about Freddy, and they figured that the only way to truly stop him is to keep his existence a secret from the children and teenagers in the town, and any child or teenager who does have contact with him ends up getting locked away. So because of this, Freddy is trapped in hell. Now Jason is also in hell following the events of Jason Goes to Hell, but specifically his own personal hell, and Freddy invades Jason's personal hell, taking the form of Pamela Voorhees, and long story short, Freddy brings Jason back to life and sends him to Springwood because he figures that if Jason kills a few people in Springwood, people would think it's him doing it, and this would promote the fear of Freddy and allow Freddy to come back. But when Freddy realizes that he can't control Jason, he tries to kill Jason again, and ultimately the movie leads to the battle between Freddy and Jason, and a small group of teenagers end up getting caught in the middle of this battle between these two supernatural serial killers. So in the movie, Freddy is once again played by Robert Englund, who played Freddy Krueger in the first 7 Nightmare on Elm Street movies. And officially, this was the last time he ever really played the character, although he would show up as this character again in an episode of the sitcom The Goldbergs, but that's specifically a parody. In terms of, the actual Nightmare on Elm Street canon, this is the last time Englund played Krueger, and he's, of course, great in the movie, although I would have preferred it if Freddy was a little more like he was in the first 3 movies, where he was genuinely scary. Here, it almost seems like they tried to kind of do a mix between the scary Freddy of the first 3 movies and the more comedic Freddy that you saw in Nightmares 4 through 6. But what do you think of Robert Englund in this movie?
I think it's pure. I think it's pure Robert Englund. But I agree with you 100%. I feel like they were trying to capture the what made Freddy Krueger scary to begin with, and then they started adding the one-liners and all these other aspects, the jokes and everything into it. And they do have a bit of a comedy in it, so I've kind of liked the comedy side to it. I grew when I watched the classic Friday the 13th, the first one, and the first 3 ones. He was a lot more serious, a lot more of a threat. But as it goes on, I kind of melted into the comedy aspect to it. You
mean Nightmare on Elm Street?
Oh yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street. I kind of just kind of warmed up to it, and I kind of like it. You know what I mean? It brings me back to me watching Freddy Krueger, and always I didn't start watching Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one. My first one that I watched was the Dream Warriors, and I went back and then
yeah. And what do you think of Ken Kirzinger as Jason? Now, originally, they were going to get Kane Hodder, who played Jason from Friday the 13th, Part 7, all the way to Jason X. He was supposed to play Jason in this one, but they decided to go with Ken Kirzinger because he was significantly taller, and I think Ronnie Yu said he wanted Jason to tower over Freddy, which I think is kind of stupid, but I somewhat see his logic.
Yeah. I mean, making him an opposing threat and, like, making him extremely large, I could see that. I understand that. As far as his performance, I mean, how do you rate a Jason performance?
Well, I mean, Kane Hodder is definitely, and you even said this in our review of Jason Goes to Hell, Kane Hodder's Jason is a lot more cunning. And this Jason definitely comes off as a little more, I hate to use the phrase stupid, but definitely more easily controllable.
He's one aspect, and that's just murder and butcher everything in his whole entire path.
Yeah, but he doesn't seem to have the same sort of intelligence that Kane Hodder's Jason had, and I would have preferred that Jason to go up against Freddy.
Yeah. This one, it kind of felt like he was a dog. Being led on by what he thought was his mother. And, Freddy Krueger, shape-shifting, his shape-shifting abilities. But, yeah, I agree with you on that. I agree with you on that. He felt more like a dog, just let out. He didn't really have one-dimensional. He was more one-dimensional.
Yeah. Now, and speaking of Jason's mother, in the movie, Freddy takes on the form of Pamela Voorhees, and the actress playing Pamela Voorhees, I think, her name is Paula Shore, but originally it was going to be Betsy Palmer, who played Pamela in the original Friday the 13th, but I think she was asking for too much money, and New Line Cinema didn't want to pay her the money that she was asking for, so they went with Paula Shore instead.
I think that's a shame. I don't know the amount that she was asking for, but I would understand her asking for a significant amount. I mean, she was the original antagonist that started the series. So if I was the first, I'm like, dude, like, this is more than just featuring me. This is, I would ask for more dinero too. So.
Now let's talk about the protagonists of the film. So you have Laurie, played by Monica Keena. What do you think of our final girl in the movie?
I liked her, but there was I'm not gonna lie, there was a part of me that I like at the beginning, she was kind of, it was crazy because it was such a switch. What I felt like was such a switch. Like, at first, she was kind of like slow. She was kind of dumb.
All right.
But then she kind of like puts pieces together, then she becomes very aggressive towards the later half. After knowing what happened to her mother, she just went full-on aggressive, wanting to make sure Freddy Krueger was dead, wanted to make sure that she got the last laugh, wanted to get it was completely opposite from the person that was spazzing out, that just couldn't put two and two together and was just like in the middle of the class hallway. It was like, it was kind of weird. I don't know how to say, but I like the character. I like the characters in it. A lot of them, I don't know. It wasn't too memorable for me, but there was a lot of jokes that made me, appreciate it. Her friends, the stoners, the Jay, Silent Bob type of archetype.
Yeah, that character, I forgot the actor's name, but the character's name is Freeberg, I think, and he's so clearly trying to be Jason Mewes. And they actually, a few years ago, they did a documentary on the Nightmare on Elm Street movies called Never Sleep Again, and they played on that in the documentary, where they had Jason Mewes show up in the documentary talking about his motivation for playing Freebird, and then he's like, wait a minute, I didn't play Freebird, I wasn't in this movie. But you also have Kia in the movie, played by Kelly Rowland, who was in Destiny's Child.
Yeah.
What do you think of her?
You know, she was pretty wild. I liked that. I liked her little spunk aspect into it. You know what I mean? I fucking love when she berated the shit out of Freddy Krueger. I was like, hey, yo, you know, and then just Freddy's like, kind of like, you know, pointing behind and giving like, you're not scary. You're not fucking. You're nothing. You know what I mean? Jason is this, and that, and then you got the guy towering right behind her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And then you also have Katharine Isabelle, who people might recognize from Ginger Snaps. She plays another one of Laurie's friends in the movie. I like Katharine Isabelle a lot. But that's honestly my biggest criticism of this movie is, honestly, the teenage characters. I'm not a huge fan of them. Laurie has grown on me over the years, but the other characters like Keena or Katharine Isabelle's character, to me, are completely forgettable. Yeah. You also have Laurie's boyfriend, Will, played by Jason Ritter, who's actually John Ritter's son. Again, kind of a forgettable character. For me, the best character in this movie was Mark, played by Brendan Fletcher, who you find out was locked up at the Weston Hills Psychiatric Hospital with Will, and I wish he was the main character of this movie, because, for one, Brendan Fletcher is acting his ass off in this movie, and to me, he's the best character in the film.
The documentary, he stated that he was trying to put it, you know, he was trying to make an impression. This was what his first Friday the 13th / you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, and you know, he was a fan of it, and he was trying to. The one thing that I do like about that character, there was a lot of lore behind him. His brother, how he was placed in the cycle, you know, how he was placed over there, and another cool aspect is I think he was one of the most rational characters out of them, because he was asking the important questions. You know what I mean? And he seems to know a lot more than a lot of the other characters, based off of his experience with his brother. Another cool thing that I like about the movie that I thought was a good idea, was pretty cunning, was the drug that they were giving to the people to make them forget.
Hypnosil.
Yeah.
That was actually from Nightmare 3. Oh. That was like a drug that was in Nightmare on Elm Street 3.
The heck? How did I forget that?
Yeah. And even the psychiatric hospital is from Nightmare on Elm Street 3. Which I liked that, but that is one thing about the movie is it feels more like a Nightmare on Elm Street movie that Jason just happens to appear in than a proper Friday the 13th movie. Which in a way makes sense, because this was produced by New Line Cinema, and New Line Cinema created the Nightmare on Elm Street series. New Line's considered the house that Freddy built, and I think Robert Shaye, who is the producer of all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, I think he dictated that this movie focus more on Freddy.
Yeah.
But it's ironic, because Jason gets more kills in this movie, yet ultimately the movie does feel more like Nightmare on Elm Street than Friday the 13th.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the main reasons is there's not too much personality for Jason. You know, there's not too much exploring. You know, he's just a very silent assassin, a silent murderer. And, you know, you got Freddy Krueger, who has all of these, you know, aspects. He can fully express himself. You know, there's more talking with him. So, you know, and not only that, it does feel that way because underneath, no pun intended, his claws are basically on everything. Like, he's the one that orchestrated everything. He's the one that set everything up from plan A to plan B to bring him over to his side of the world. And he's the one that brought Jason back from the very beginning, and it explored more of his past. If anybody didn't watch the previous movies, it explored his past in the very beginning of the movie. So it does kind of feel like it was showing cameos and not cameos. I'm sorry. It was showing
scenes from the other Nightmare on Elm Street
nightmares leading up to this. So it kind of felt like this was an addition to it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, but that also brings up One of the biggest plot holes of the movie is, okay, so Springwood is supposed to be in Ohio. Crystal Lake is supposed to be in New Jersey.
Yeah.
How the fuck did Jason, when he resurrected from hell, walk from New Jersey to Ohio? And then even, like, when they go back to Crystal Lake at the end of the movie, that's not a short drive. Yet, when you watch the movie, it seems like the drive was maybe only an hour or two for the characters, when it's like, no, they must have been driving a long fucking time. They must have had a lot of that tranquilizer, and it's like, granted, maybe it's just bad editing, but it's like, that would have been an interesting sort of subplot onto itself. Yeah. These teens traveling with this basically zombie in their car between, like, 3 fucking states, you know?
You know what I wish they did do? I wish they did more with the officer that came from New Jersey. The one that was assigned
to Springwood.
Yeah. I felt like they could have done more. I felt like they had a big opportunity. They could have used him on something, you know what I mean? Maybe have a pass that made him more connected to Jason, and just rather than just an information dump, and then he just...
Yeah.
I felt like they could have done more.
And what do you think of Gary Chalk as the sheriff of Springwood, who's kind of a minor antagonist in the movie? What do you think of him?
I mean, his acting and performance is pretty good. It's spot on. Felt 80-ish. You know what I mean? I don't know why his acting kind of felt 80-ish.
80s-ish?
Yeah, 80-ish. Yeah, 80-ish. I can't even talk. But I like his performance. I like the fact that he's kind of like the puppeteer on the whole entire community. It's kind of like a hush-hush the adults.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I will say that they did had a strong point, and they let it go. You know what I mean? Like, he could have maybe put more expo behind what went on. They could have gave him more screen time. They did give him a decent amount, but I felt like they could have done a little more. They
mention, like, other things that happened, like, a few years prior. It's like, it seems like there was a whole other story that could be told that happened between this and Freddy's Dead.
Yeah.
Like, I honestly would have loved to have seen the story of how they, like, repopulate the town, and how the police, like, eventually get involved in this and find the way to cover Krueger up and basically suppress Freddy's existence. Like, that onto itself would have been a fascinating movie.
Yeah, it would, actually.
This movie also features a brief cameo appearance from Robert Shaye, who is the former head of New Line Cinema and was the producer of all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies leading up to this. And one of the extras in this movie who you see in the high school scene is actually Evangeline Lilly, who would go on to play Kate in Lost and is now probably best known for playing Wasp in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But keep in mind, this was before Lost, which was her breakout role. This was before she was famous, and she literally is just an extra in this movie. So what do you think of the soundtrack of the movie?
The soundtrack, actually, the non-metal soundtrack was alright. I liked it.
Like the basic score?
The basic score, yeah. It was okay. The metal soundtrack, it was the product of its time, you know.
This is such an early 2000s soundtrack, but you know what? It created some nostalgia. And I know people make fun of the whole, like, new metal era, but I dig some of that music.
It's hard for me to complain. I mean, there's a lot of bands that I grew up listening to in that era, you know. And a few of them are in that soundtrack, so...
Yeah.
The fight choreography was pretty interesting. See, I do like when they first really encounter, Freddy Krueger went into
Jason's
dream, and the fight choreography, like, you could tell that Freddy in his world, he had more control. I kind of dig the abilities. It kind of shows more, like he's able to throw him around. He has superhuman strength that this small guy can send somebody as giant as that. And I like the fact that he even struggles to get rid. You can't get rid of Jason, but it's also cool that they kind of put, if you don't fear Freddy, you have some way to fight him back, because Jason at that point didn't fear Freddy, and he was actually giving him some trouble. You know what I mean? Like, he was sending Freddy Krueger in his own backyard, where he should have most of the control in the dream world. He sends him flying. You know what I mean? Everything that he puts on Jason, he's just a relentless, pure rage of vengeance that just completely takes over. So he doesn't know any fear other than the one that Freddy eventually discovers. The other fights where Freddy was pulled from the dream world, I thought was pretty cool. I like the whole, at this point, Freddy doesn't have his strength that he would have in the dream world. So I like the fact, but he's still supernatural. He takes things that humans would have died already, you know, like being thrown as far as he was, being grabbed and being used to go through like half of the foundation of the house. You know, it's crazy. I thought it was pretty cool the way he was sending. He was using objects and things around the environment to actually do more damage to Jason. So the fight choreography, for me, I enjoy that. I enjoy that a lot.
It was cool, and I think it's a well-made movie. It's not a very well-written movie, but it is a well-made film. So now I just want to talk about some of the other script ideas they had, and like some of the other scripts that were submitted to New Line that were ultimately rejected, but I know a lot of the scripts for Freddy vs. Jason dealt with this idea of a cult that worshipped Freddy. And I think the premise was going to be that there was this cult that worshipped Freddy called the Fredheads, who were going to try to resurrect Freddy, but instead they accidentally resurrect Jason. I think that was going to be the plot of one of the scripts, and again, apparently that idea of a Freddy cult was used in several of the Freddy vs. Jason scripts. But what do you think of that idea? Could that have worked at all?
You know what? I like the fact... I kind of dig the cult aspect of it. That would have been something new, because, you know, the antagonists are just worshippers, and they accidentally bring Jason rather than the person that would have been a pretty cool idea. That would have been a pretty damn cool idea. I wonder how that works with the everybody within having their little hush-hush secret, you know, and then they have this small cult. It would be like a battle between the people who are trying to silence Freddy and the cultists. So I wonder how... See, that's a story within itself. Like, how is that battle between... There's a lot you could go with that.
Yeah, and then there was also an idea... And apparently this script, because again, they were trying to make a Freddy vs. Jason movie for years before this, and apparently this script was written around the time of the O.J. Simpson trial. There was one idea they had of Jason actually being arrested and put on trial. I don't know how that would have turned out. I guess it would have been kind of interesting. Like, it was going to almost act as like a courtroom drama, just with Jason, and somehow Freddy was going to show up in there somehow. There was also another idea where it was going to follow a little girl, and basically you were going to find out that neither Freddy or Jason were real, and they were all in this little girl's head. I feel like that would have pissed off a lot of fans if they went with that idea.
Yeah.
Apparently in one of the scripts, it was going to feature Steven and Jessica from Jason Goes to Hell meeting Alice from Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and 5, and they were going to team up to try to fight Freddy Krueger and Jason. That would have been kind of interesting.
Yeah, that one sounds pretty... That one sounds more interesting. actually.
Supposedly in one of the scripts, Tommy Jarvis was going to show up, and actually, in one of the scripts for Freddy vs. Jason, Tommy Jarvis is mentioned, but that I would have liked to have seen that, like characters who have faced off against either Freddy Krueger or Jason, teaming up and facing off against both of them. That, I think, would have been an interesting movie. Maybe not so much for a first Freddy vs. Jason movie, but if they ever did a sequel, that would have been a cool idea for a sequel.
Yeah, because they both sides, they have tactics. They know their enemy. You know, they've survived. So.
It would be interesting to see how, like, Tommy Jarvis would react to Freddy Krueger, how he would try to fight Freddy, and it would be interesting to see how, like, Alice or somebody would fight Jason.
Yeah.
But, of course, none of those ideas ever happened. In one of the original scripts, it was going to end with Freddy Krueger and Jason going to hell, and they were going to continue fighting in hell, and then chains were going to wrap around both of them. And then Pinhead was going to show up saying, what seems to be the problem, gentlemen? That would have been pretty freaking sick. I mean, I'm not sure if I actually buy Hellraiser as being in the same universe as Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, but if they did that, I would have been willing to go with it.
You know, that would be a pretty nice alternative ending. Well, that would have been, and leading up to another movie. Like, that was... Yeah.
And also around this time, and apparently this was going to happen because Doug Bradley, who plays Pinhead, who I met a few years ago, told me this, they were going to do a crossover between Hellraiser and Halloween. Supposedly it was going to be written by Clive Barker and directed by John Carpenter. Why the fuck that never happened, I don't know. But if they went with this ending with Pinhead and they did that movie, it would have been a good way to establish almost like a cinematic universe. Granted, this was still a few years before the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so maybe this idea would have been ahead of its time, but that would have been cool, honestly, to, like, establish this idea that Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraiser, and Halloween are all in the same continuity.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure if I really buy them all as in the same continuity, but again, if they actually did those movies, I would have been willing to accept it.
And hey, they got that, Jason Goes to Hell. I mean, they have that, the Necronomicon. You could have had, like, Ash. You could have had something with the Deadites or something in the background. Explore that with it.
And that brings up my next point is, there was never a sequel to this movie, but apparently they were going to, and I'm surprised they never did a sequel, because this was a huge hit when it came out. I think this was the highest grossing, it was at least the highest grossing Nightmare on Elm Street film. I'm not sure, it might have been the highest grossing Friday the 13th film too. So the fact that they never did a sequel is kind of a surprise. But they were going to apparently do a sequel with Ash from the Evil Dead movies. But apparently Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi were both against it. But they did end up doing a comic book series called Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. I'm not sure if I really count those comics as canon. I do like them. I like the first Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash comic series better than the second series. The first one I could honestly see as a real movie. The second comic book series, The Nightmare Warriors, felt just like pure fan service, and I liked it. In that one, they did bring in a lot of the characters from the earlier movies into that, but it got a little ridiculous, especially with Freddy Krueger and Jason commanded an army of Deadites to take out Washington. It's like, I'm not sure if I really count this as legitimately being canon.
Yeah.
But if you do want a Freddy vs. Jason sequel, technically those comics are the best you're gonna get, honestly. But yeah, unfortunately, there was never a sequel to this, and they ended up doing a reboot of the Friday the 13th series a few years later, which officially rebooted the continuity, and they also did a Nightmare on Elm Street reboot a year after. But you know what? I know it's never gonna happen, and especially because Robert Englund has said he's too old to play Freddy at this point. I'm still hoping in my heart of hearts they somehow do a Freddy vs. Jason 2.
Yeah.
And if they do, I want to see them actually, like, bring in Tommy Jarvis or Alice, you know, I think that would be cool, but I know it's never gonna happen. The best we could hope for is, I know Heather Likenkamp, who played Nancy in the original Nightmare on Elm Street, says that she wants to do a Nightmare on Elm Street sequel that ignores all the other films except the first one, like what they call a legacy sequel. That's probably the best we're going to hope for Nightmare on Elm Street. As far as Friday the 13th, they are A24's developing that Friday the 13th TV series. But again, we're never going to actually see an actual sequel to Freddy vs. Jason, unfortunately.
And it's crazy because they have so many opportunities. And not only, like, they have so many things they can work with. You know, with those two characters, and as well as characters from the past that they encountered and that fought them. There's a lot of things they could do, you know.
Yeah.
Especially now, and I have no idea but it is what it is. We got this movie, so.
So here's my late friend Chris Mano giving his thoughts on Freddy vs. Jason. Now, back in early 2018, we did do a retrospective on the Friday the 13th series, and we did a retrospective on the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and Chris contributed to both videos, and I decided to sort of combine what he said about Freddy vs. Jason in the Friday the 13th retrospective with what he said about Freddy vs. Jason in the Nightmare on Elm Street retrospective. Like, I basically took the two clips and edited them together into one video.
I feel like this is one that me and Christian kind of disagree on. Personally, I loved it. For me as a little kid, this was like my Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. It was, you know, these two huge horror icons who were going to fight, and it was legit, it was canon, it wasn't like a comic book or a novel, it was like a movie that was happening. And they brought back Robert, and a lot of people are pissed that Kane isn't Jason in it. I like Ken, personally. Although I think my favorite Jason, ironically, actually is CJ from Part 6. But Ken does a really good job in this, and he's crazy fucking tall, taller than Kane, so he's almost more qualified in a way. But this one, like, there's so many great lines. I remember the stoner dude. He's like, dude, that goalie was pissed about something in that, in the cornfield scene. Yeah, I really think it's fun to watch. And admittedly, it does lean more towards Elm Street, which is something they probably should have worked on. But for that reason, I mean, for the reason that it's just the two of them fighting, and it's a lot of fun to watch. I really still do enjoy it even today. It leans more towards an Elm Street movie, so it is more appropriate for this one, especially with like that whole opening sequence where they literally recap the past 7 with that crazy montage. I like that Monica Keena's final girl, Laura, your name was? She made a great final girl for this one, because like all this stuff that she went through because of Freddy in her past and everything. It was a really good story, I think. And it blended surprisingly well with all the stuff with Jason and everything. But it is, I think it is more of an Elm Street movie first and foremost. It's like an Elm Street movie where Jason makes a guest appearance. And it's a pretty kick-ass guest appearance. They fight and everything. It's so fun. And I like that they went back to Weston Hills and they brought back... what's the name of the drug that they Hypnocil? Yeah, like I like that Hypnocil is like a huge part of it, and they really got into like the whole biology of like sleeping and everything. It's they took it to an interesting place, and then you get the added fun of watching him beat the shit out of Jason. So yeah, I like Freddy vs. Jason a lot.
And here's my friend Mark Allen Gunnels, who is actually an author, giving his thoughts on Freddy vs. Jason. Now, this was also taken from the 2018 Nightmare on Elm Street retrospective.
After that, they did Freddy vs. Jason, which is a film I was excited about. I actually went to see it when it midnight showing when it first came out, because I was so excited to see it. And I felt very let down by it. It was definitely... I don't even think of it as a horror movie. It was a action comedy with a lot of, jokes and sight gags and some horrible characters. The actors I didn't think did a good job. The characters themselves were not very likable or relatable. They used some things from earlier films in the Nightmare series, like the Weston Hills Psychiatric Hospital and... Hypnocil, the medicine that's supposed to keep you from dreaming. I like that they pulled some of that in, but other than that, none of the stuff from the earlier films really felt like it was a part of it. And to me, it didn't have the feel of a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and it didn't have a feel of a Friday the 13th movie, and it didn't even feel like a natural joining of the two. It just felt goofy and ridiculous.
And here are Joey's thoughts on Freddy vs. Jason.
Freddy vs. Jason is really part 11 in the Friday the 13th franchise. And Jason goes to hell when Freddy had the glove and he pulled Jason's mask under the ground. I had a feeling then they were starting to come out with something like that, like a Freddy vs. Jason. And when I was younger, I always was thinking that I'd like to see a movie like that. It'd be cool, and sure enough, they came out with it. It stars Jason Ritter, too. It's actually John Ritter's son. And the other guy that played Deputy Scott, I actually met him a while back, I guess probably like 3 years ago or something like that, at a convention. It was like in Parsippany. I took a camcorder video. But what happened is that it got deleted by mistake. But yeah, Freddy vs. Jason was actually the second movie where they started CGI, I believe. Yeah, because I know Jason X, they started it. So yeah, this was like the second movie they started CGI, which it was still cool, but like I say, I like the effects in the 80s better. This again, is more like Jason X. It's not one of my favorite in the franchise, but I have to say though, it's still cool. It's for the first time Freddy vs. Jason. But yeah, I would check it out. I recommend to check this movie. It's still a cool movie in the franchise, in my opinion.
Here's my friend John giving his thoughts on Freddy vs. Jason.
Before I give my honest opinion on Freddy vs. Jason, I want to mention that I have a book on the making of Freddy vs. Jason called Slash of the Titans. It was written by Dustin McNeil, who's written a lot of good books on horror movies. He wrote books on the Halloween series and Halloween sequels we never got. I highly recommend those books. It shows what the original script ideas were for Freddy vs. Jason. The original ideas were insane and crazy what they had in mind. The author interviewed some of the original writers, producers, and filmmakers who never made their script version of Freddy vs. Jason. I read this book a while ago, back when I got this as a birthday present. I don't remember everything about what the original scripts were, but I do remember some of the simple basic ones, like Jason on trial. My first thought was, were they trying to mock the O.J. Simpson trial that was going on at the time that was so big and red hot, and the Freddy cult? As interesting as this would have been, but that could have gone either way. Also, they want to bring back original characters like Tommy Jarvis and Alice from A Nightmare on Elm Street teaming up to fight Freddy and Jason. Now that could have been awesome and cool. As I said before in the New Blood video, Part 7 was originally supposed to be a Freddy vs. Jason movie, but it was legal rights issues with Freddy being owned by New Line Cinema and Jason being owned by Paramount at the time. And I said this before, I'll say it again, the 80s would have been a perfect time to make a Freddy vs. Jason movie. After the way Jason Goes to Hell ended with seeing Freddy's glove, we finally got to see a Freddy vs. Jason movie after waiting for a decade. I remember this movie came out in 2003. I was 10 years old at the time. I remember being at summer camp and this movie got a lot of hype and attention, and the camp counselors would not stop talking about this movie. They said they liked it, how cool the fight scenes were. Because I was little at the time, I was not old enough to go see this in the movie theaters. I did not see this movie until I was 16 years old. Well, I don't hate or love this movie. The concept is cool. Two horror iconic characters facing off each other. We got two awesome epic fight scene battles between Freddy and Jason. One in the Dream World and one in Camp Crystal Lake. Nice visuals, decent direction by Ronnie Yu, how we got Freddy and Jason to fight each other. Robert Englund did a good job as Freddy Krueger in this movie. Thankfully, Jason and Freddy's mom are both not named Pamela. Ha! Well, Ken Kirzinger, he may be no Kane Hodder, but he did an alright job as Jason Voorhees. But some fans either like or don't like his performance as Jason Voorhees. Ironically, Ken Kirzinger was in Jason Takes Manhattan as a waiter gets mad at Jason for damaging his restaurant, and Jason throws him to the side. When I met Kane Hodder, I asked him why they recast him as Jason in this movie, and he said to this day, he still does not understand and know why that is. I like the kill scene that Jason does in this movie when he kills the kid on the bed after he has sex with his girlfriend. Also when Jason crashes the party and these stoners are making fun of him and he twists the one guy's neck. He gets on fire, throws a machete at the overweight guy. I met Ken Kirzinger at Chiller Theater in 2015. Nice guy, friendly dude, but man was that guy so tall. One minor nitpick I noticed in this movie is that Jason is afraid of water, which does make sense because he drowned in the first movie. But in the last few movies, Jason did not seem to be afraid of water when he killed his victims. They also bring back the Hypnocil pill they used in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. Nice homage. The movie's not perfect. I can agree that the characters in this movie are lame, cliche, not interesting. This is where the movie's a letdown. They're not memorable like previous characters from the original Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday movies. Kelly Rowland's character as Kia was so annoying. You're not even scary. Please, give me a break. Just like Jason X, once again, two actors who were on Goosebumps are in this movie. Katharine, Isabelle, and Brendan Fletcher. He was on the episode Werewolf of Fever Swamp, which is one of my favorite episodes of the series. Katharine Isabelle was in It Came Beneath the Sea. I met Katharine Isabelle. She was very nice. Despite these characters are not the best, Brendan Fletcher as Mark was okay. He had some potential. I just wish he was kept alive longer, and they could have killed him in the end of this movie. I met his brother that Freddy killed, and he was in A Christmas Story, but I don't have a photo of him. I had a nice 5-minute chit-chat with him. It blows my mind that the bully from A Christmas Story was in this movie. I did not recognize him because he was all grown up at this point. The stoner characters were referenced in mocking Jason Mewes from Jay and Silent Bob. Laurie and Will were boring characters with no personality and no chemistry. Paula Shaw did an okay job as Pamela Voorhees. They originally wanted Betsy Palmer to come back as Mrs. Voorhees, but she said she did not like the script of this movie. And that's just really sad. Ronnie Yu directed this movie, directed The Bride of Chucky a few years prior with John Ritter. Here he is directing Freddy vs. Jason with his son Jason Ritter. Like father, like son, they both worked with Ronnie Yu. Coincidence, and ironic. Another minor complaint that I never realized or thought about until years later when I rewatched this movie is that Freddy Krueger only has 3 kills in this movie. He kills Mark, Laurie's mom, and kills the stoner character, with Jason killing him together. Jason Voorhees has more kills in this movie than Freddy Krueger does. It's probably the lowest kills in a Freddy Krueger movie that I've ever seen. As a horror fan, I wish they made more Versus movie like this. Think about how much money these movies would make. I wish they made Freddy vs. Jason vs. Michael Myers in the fight. That would have been cool and awesome. But sadly, it's probably never going to happen at this point in time because of legal rights issues. Well, it's not a perfect movie because this movie was in development hell for so many years. This movie had a lot more potential to be done better. But that's what happens with a certain movie like this. After when you have original script ideas that were rejected, they took way too long, they move on. When it's finally made, it either works or does not work when trying to satisfy fans. Despite the movie's flaws, I still enjoy it for what it is. The real highlight to this movie is Freddy and Jason fighting, that's it.
Now, before I end this video, I just want to cut to a discussion between me, my friend Jeremy, and our friend Bill Burns, who is actually a college professor, where we talked about Freddy vs. Jason. Now, this was taken from the retrospective that we did on the Nightmare on Elm Street series back in early 2018. And keep in mind, a lot of the same points that I brought up with Chris about this movie, I also bring up in this discussion. Also, keep in mind, this was recorded a few years ago, and I'm actually a lot more negative towards the movie in my discussion with Bill and Jeremy than I was with Chris, because like I said, I have recently kind of pulled the stick out of my ass about this movie, but I was actually a lot more negative towards the movie than I remembered being, and my opinions of the film have somewhat softened in the years since I recorded this discussion. Freddy vs. Jason, this is a movie I both like and hate at the same time. I do enjoy this film, but I think this is definitely my least favorite of the entire Nightmare on Elm Street series, not counting the remake. What do you guys think of Freddy vs. Jason?
The first thing I want to say is my biggest gripe with the movie, and that is that Freddy only gets 1 kill in the entire film. I mean, come on.
Well, technically, he did. You found out in a flashback that he killed Laurie's mother. Sorry.
But
yeah, you find out that he killed Laurie's mother, and also, you could kind of count the death of the Jason Mewes knockoff character. Like, you could kind of count that as both a Freddy and Jason kill, because he was possessing that guy when Jason killed him.
Did it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, they couldn't give it... They couldn't have more times in the movie where it was clearly him killing the characters.
My issue with this film is really the characters. I hated the characters in this film.
I agree. That's me. I thought the concept of the movie was good. I thought the look of the movie was good. I liked what Ronnie Yu.
Yeah, Ronnie Yu.
His direction was really good.
Yeah,
I thought Englund's performance was great.
Yeah.
I thought Jason was great. The thing I didn't like was the teenage characters. I could not care less about them.
Any
they
of
were
them?
just cliched. Yeah. I don't know. I just thought they were cliched. I just thought that they were poorly written. They were poorly developed.
The only character I kind of liked in this movie was the character of Mark, who knows about Freddy. Mm-hmm. You find out that his brother was killed by Freddy years prior to this. I liked that character. The other characters I couldn't give a shit about.
I also sort of liked Will, who was played by Jason Ritter. I thought he was sympathetic. But I mostly agree with you.
But you know what? I still enjoy the film for what it is, but the characters really bring this movie down for me.
The movie has a great look, especially when Laurie goes into Jason's dream and it's at Camp Crystal Lake. You know, it's got an eerie, old.
And don't they bring back
50s quality?
They bring back
Pamela?
Yeah,
they do bring back Pamela Voorhees, unfortunately not played by Betsy Palmer,
right.
But I think she's still good, and then I like when she turns into Freddy, and he's like,
I've been away from my children for far too long.
Yeah, that's great. And I also love Freddy's opening narration. It's just great.
I liked how they also brought back the Western Hills Psychiatric Hospital and Hypnosil. Yeah. So there were some callbacks to the older films, but in general, I would say this film failed more than it succeeded. And I do think, though, this film was more of a Nightmare on Elm Street movie than it was a Friday the 13th movie.
Yeah, I've read that Bob Shaye was a lot more interested in the Freddy side of things than the Jason. And that makes sense because Freddy is what got New Line started.
Yeah, I do want to point out this one does sort of pick up where Jason Goes to Hell left off, because Jason Goes to Hell ended where Freddy's hand comes out of the ground, implying that the Nightmare on Elm Street series takes place in the same universe as the Friday the 13th movies, but that gets confirmed in this movie. And also, the movie does begin where both Freddy and Jason are in hell. It begins in Jason's own personal hell, which I thought was kind of interesting. Apparently in the novelization, in that scene where that girl that Jason kills in his personal hell morphs into those other Jason victims, apparently in the novelization, the girl also morphs into the ghost of Creighton Duke from Jason Goes to Hell, and even the ghost of Alice from the first one, which would have been a nice little tie back to the earlier films.
Yeah, I agree. That would have been great. I wish they could have done that, but
yeah, there's a lot of in some of the original scripts. I know they were going to bring back Alice from part 4 and 5. They were going to bring back the characters from Jason Goes to Hell. Why didn't that happen?
Right, because these new characters stink. They're not interesting at all to me.
I mean,
it would have been really interesting to have a character that has dealt with Freddy before, now also having to deal with Jason, or vice versa.
Right, yeah, just have them team up.
I mean, the thing about Freddy versus Jason is that it was in development hell for a long, long time. So the script was constantly undergoing numerous revisions. Maybe there were ideas to bring back characters, but then they just, over time, they just had to move on to something else.
I know in one of the original scripts, there was this whole concept of a Freddy cult. Yeah, which, I don't know, it's part of me wants to say that would have been different for the movie and would have been unique. There's another part of me that's kind of stupid. So I think story-wise, I like some of the ideas in it, though. I think the idea of Freddy basically being a virus, I thought was a really interesting concept. I thought the concept of the adults knowing about Freddy, but trying to keep it a secret from the children, and treating it almost like a quarantine. That was interesting.
Right.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the movie gets bogged down by the really annoying characters and a lot of the cliches in the film. It's just horribly cliched.
Yeah.
One thing that really bothers me is the scene in the school hallway when Laurie's describing her dream of Freddy, and then Mark starts singing the 1-2 Freddy's coming for you, and all the other kids are looking at him. It's who does that?
Yeah, right.
I guess they were trying to go for this idea that, okay, maybe all the kids somehow subconsciously knew about Freddy, and that's why they were all turning towards Laurie, but it came off as so cheesy in the film.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, characters were kind of annoying. I'll agree with you there.
I mean, part of me kind of likes the stoner character. Like, that goalie was pissed about something.
Yeah, that was funny. There was another scene where, Kia is reading this magazine, and she had
got your nose!
Yeah, she previously said, I'm considering getting a nose job, and then Freddy reaches in with the claw glove and says, got your nose, and rips her nose off, and then she wakes up, and she's fine, I mean, isn't...
Yeah, wasn't it supposed to be like anything that he does to you in the dream world happens to you physically in the real world?
Yeah, they forgot about that.
Yeah, it's a big plot hole when you really think about the rest of the series.
Shouldn't her nose have just been ripped off in the real world too?
The movie's the story and the script, I think, are the biggest problems with this movie. I don't think it's very well written. I appreciate some things about it, but overall, it's not a great movie. I still have some enjoyment for the film, though.
I mean, I liked the concept of Freddy using Jason to inspire fear in the residents of Springwood so that he would be able to come back. And I did. The final fight between the two is just great to watch. That's the highlight. I think there is a really eerie scene during their first battle in the dream world where, Freddy's saying, come on, and then he sees Jason is stalled because of the water, and he's like, oh, I do like how he then just plays on that fear and makes the water come out, and he turns him into a little boy.
But that's never been in any other films. Jason's never been afraid of water.
Well, I mean, I guess it would be assumed because he drowned. But, and I also love how he says to the little boy, Jason, you've got a face only a mother could love, and then pulls the decapitated head of Mrs. Voorhees.
But any closing thoughts on Freddy vs. Jason?
Yeah, I think I still, even with its flaws, I enjoy watching it. I could, it's a fun film.
Don't get me wrong, it's one that I can pop in every once in a while, but this is definitely one of the weaker films of both franchises, I think. I think if you're looking for a good example of a movie from either one of these franchises, this is not a good example of... or I should say it's not a great example of both franchises.
Well, I mean, I would agree with that. It's unfortunate that, a lot of the characters are annoying and that, of course, they couldn't get Kane Hodder and Betsy Palmer back. But, ultimately, I still have a lot of fun watching it. I remember watching it, when I first got into Nightmare on Elm Street when I was younger on TV and just, loving every minute of it. It's a fun film.
So that was my review on Freddy vs. Jason. My next movie review will be on the 2009 Friday the 13th reboot.